Hi guys, I am responding to all of your questions from the week 2 discussion board. Before I do that though, I just want to give you all a whole bunch of praise, kudos. The discussion boards are really kind of functioning in exactly the way that I want them to. I love how much you all are helping each other out. If you posted your original post and then quickly replied to other people, you might just jump back into the week 2 discussion board because some of your classmates have replied further into like your original post and have offered some great bits of advice. And of course, some of it is just the standard, like, good luck with your project. Sounds like we're both having the same struggles, so there's just kind of some empathy there. But then there is also a bunch of really great suggestions, 2 of which I will highlight in this video. So I expect that the video I'm going to make is going to be rather long. I will post sort of like the main topic, and then a link to kind of that section of the video. So if you want to jump around to find the answers to questions, then you can use those links. And then also, if there's a question that I overlooked, or if you have a follow-up question, please email me. I've already been talking to a couple people today. You guys are asking really great questions. I know that this is a complicated project. I think that from some of the questions I'm looking at and getting, it seems to be unlike a lot of the things that you've been asked to do. So if you have to get your head out of the whole standard English 112 paper and into whatever we're doing here. All right, so let's look at these questions. And I've grouped them together if they seemed repetitive. I'll just answer the question once. So first question, my question is for the essay itself. Should we be citing the TV show or movie with quotations from a specific episode, or can it be something occurring in the show from a general point of view? So we will eventually talk about the best way to structure the upcoming paper, and in that structure I will provide you guys with some notes on how to best address your analysis of your movie or TV show. You can do either one. You can talk about the specifics and you can quote from the language if it applies, but of course there are times where there's nothing to necessarily quote from. You just have to describe in detail. So I would say really this question is more of like detail versus general. You want to give as many relevant details as possible within your paper. So if you're in the planning stages and you're thinking about what scenes from the movie or TV show am I going to pull from, you don't want to just in your paper make the claim that you see FBI agents pulling files. You want to point to a specific scene where you see an FBI agent pull a file, and they might do that 100 times. Just find one scene or a couple of scenes, but one is all you need. So I think the most successful papers in regard to your question are from papers that do talk about details and when possible can incorporate the specific language within the show if an actor or character is talking, but only if it's relevant. If they're not saying anything relevant to the job itself, then it doesn't matter. Now, I think someone in here is writing about like the relationship between, I think it was like pediatric surgeons or pediatric nurses or something and a child. And so then in that instance, the language that person uses to talk with the child, how caring they are, how kind and soft-spoken and empathetic they are, that might apply. Whereas, if you see visually on the screen 2 people doing their job duties, but they're having a conversation about something completely unrelated, like their personal lives, then you might just describe the job that you see them doing and not quote about that personal life. So I hope that has answered your question there, but email me if you have more, because I'm sure there's always a follow-up. Okay, a question I have about the annotated bib, is there a certain number of sources we need to have? Yes, so I know at the bottom, I think Gabriella did this, so you guys copy and pasted somewhere in the discussion forum from here. So a lot of you guys are talking about 5 sources, and I want you to know that the number you need to see on your annotated bibliography is not 5, it's 6. There's 5 secondary sources, but you also have to cite your primary source as an annotated bibliography entry. If you have more than one primary source, like some of you have mentioned, you're going to look at 2 movies, then you will want to put both of those movies on your annotated bibliography. I did have a question earlier. Well, what if I'm citing 2 episodes of the same show? You have a couple of options. You can put 2 separate primary source entries for each episode on your annotated bibliography. You can cite the show once as a whole, or you can just cite one of those episodes and say, you know, in your evaluation, I might have to incorporate a second episode, and that's just kind of like a workaround so that you can do less work but still be effective. So if you have a question about that, let me know. But as far as the number, if you are counting individually the number of sources on your annotated bibliography, it needs to be at least 6, because you have to include that primary source as one of that number. And then you have to have 5 secondary sources, and the list is found here. I'm not going to address the list right now because someone has a question. There's a couple of questions about that list that I'll get to in just a second. So regarding ProQuest, is there any way to filter the results by date published? Yes, there is. If you go, let's see, I think I'm in the way. I don't know if you can do it straight from the advanced search page, but you might be able to. So yes, if you wanted to search like the phrase Grey's Anatomy, and then you want publication date, you can, this is totally in the way, you guys, I'm so sorry. You can search for publications, you know, before a certain date, after a certain date, on a certain date. You can even do a date range, like if you want it from 1960 to 1970. So you can filter it in that way. I think once you have completed your search, you can also filter, which I think one of your classmates answered. Let's see, sort by relevance, oldest first or most recent first. So if you do want the most recent search results, then you can sort this way as well. And there may be some other filters that help you. I'm not sure. I don't really play around with this stuff. So it looks like you could just sort by, but that advanced search is the best way to find only sources from a specific range, especially if you don't want most recent or oldest. Okay, so I've got that question answered. Here, what is the limit to the amount of sources, or is there a maximum number of sources? There's not a maximum number of sources. As long as you meet the source type requirements here on the annotated bibliography assignment sheet, there's not a maximum number. So if you wanted to have 30, you could. Would I stop reading after about 10, or I just look for the 6 that qualify? Maybe. Now, if you had 10 sources and I only need you to have 6, I'll read the whole thing. But if you've got an excessive amount of sources, I'm gonna probably not read all that. And if never mind. Okay, is there a certain time frame our sources should be published within? No, it really doesn't matter to me. I mean, you have to take into consideration the career that you're looking at. So if you're doing something that's more nursing-based, science-based, if there have been advancements within the past 5 to 10 years in your career field, then you're not going to be able to make an effective argument. Like, for example, let's say you're looking at an old movie, and one of the things that a doctor does is just like cut someone's leg off with no anesthesia. They use an old-fashioned saw-looking thing, and you couldn't make the argument that that's accurate compared to today's time. So you would either have to use a more up-to-date primary source, or you'd have to go back and look at from a historical perspective. Like, is that what surgeons did 50, 70, 80 years ago, and go to the accuracy that route? But there might be professions that it doesn't matter, or even the way that you're analyzing it doesn't matter. Generally in research, especially if you're making comparative analysis like we're doing here, then the more recent the sources, the better. But if you found a key source by a leading expert in a career field and it was published 25 years ago, and nothing has changed, then I don't think you should be forbidden to use that. I think it would be perfectly fine to use that. Okay. This is the question, I think, that pertains to the different types of sources. And I'm going to interpret it one way, and if you don't mean it the way I'm interpreting it, then please email me and let me know. The annotated bibliography requires 5 secondary sources along with a primary. Yes. Can those sources be the same, such as 2 sources from ProQuest, or should each be a different secondary source? And then someone kind of rephrased that question and said, must we include each of the specific 5 secondary sources listed, or can we use a combination to fit our writing needs? So I think if, let's say, I said you need to find a scholarly article found through ProQuest, and that scholarly article is also written by an expert in the career field, you could have one source that covers both of those criteria. Let's say, for example, another alternative, you find a source written by an expert and published on a credible website that pertains to that career field, then you could just have that one source, but you're checking off 2 boxes. Now, does that mean that you now only need to have 4 secondary sources? No, you still need to have 5 secondary sources. So if you're going to have a source written by an expert that was also found in ProQuest, then you have to have another secondary source. It doesn't have to be, now you've checked your boxes. So as long as you look at your annotated bibliography and you can check off each one of these, even if that means one source checks off 2 boxes, that's fine. But I also am going to be looking for, you have 5 secondary sources. So then you can just find a popular source or another ProQuest article or another expert article. So I hope that that has answered your question. You still have to meet all of the requirements of the annotated bib, but I guess there's some flexibility in how you do that as long as you meet the right number and you've got those checked off in terms of style. Email me if you need clarification on that. Just to be clear, do all the secondary sources have to be about both the movie and the profession? No, and I think that this is something that a lot of my students in my face-to-face class and my students here, again, are thinking that I think there's this disconnection between research and how you do effective research that I'm trying to pull students away from. If you find a bunch of sources that are making the argument you want to make, then that's not good research. So for example, let's say all of your sources, if you're looking at like the nursing field or the surgeon field, if every single one of your sources are working to make your argument, like this source is obviously talking about the accuracy of doctor dramas compared to real life. So is what I see on TV what it's like if I were to be a nurse or a surgeon or something like that. And you can see they're looking at Scrubs, Grey's Anatomy, and House. If every single one of your sources are doing this already, what's the point of you writing the paper? So you want to make sure that your sources, it's fine to have one source like this or 2 sources like this, but you want to look for alternative research, because your paper is you watching your movie or your show and saying, hey, what do I notice about this movie, or what do I notice about this TV show? And then you're saying, all right, here's what I'm seeing, but is that accurate? In order to argue whether or not it's accurate, you don't want to just say, oh, well, it's accurate because so-and-so says it is. Like, it's accurate because this article published in 2014 from medicalbag.com says it's accurate, or doesn't say it's accurate. That is just circular reasoning, and you're getting into like a loophole there. So what you can do, how can you make an effective argument, is saying, okay, well, I notice that surgeons have to follow a set step, like they do this first and then they do that next and they do this next. Is that accurate? Do surgeons actually have to follow these steps when they're doing operations? Well, then you can go to a website like Own It Online, which is a way to search for like the job duties of a specific career, and you can see what are the tasks involved, what are the skills they have to have, what kind of knowledge. So if I'm looking at something more like this, is that applicable to the show, or are they doing something wrong? Or are they doing something that they wouldn't normally do? Sources like what you see here that don't talk about the show or the movie that you're analyzing, that don't talk about accuracy but just talk about the job, those sources are the best sources for you to find, because they're going to allow you to take what you're doing in your research and apply it to the show. So it is this applied theory, comparative analysis, real life versus, like, think of a Venn diagram, right? You have your TV show or your movie, and you have your real life, and how are they not connecting, but then how are they like overlapping? Where do we see similarities? So overall, is the show accurate or is it not? Is the movie accurate or is it not? So not all of your sources have to be about both the movie and the profession. And I'm just going to kind of zoom down because both Alexandria and Samantha have really kind of touched on what I'm saying here, and they've said it beautifully. So I'm just going to read this. Perhaps, and these are just replies in the discussion board. Samantha replied to someone, perhaps you could use secondary sources that pertain to forensic science and relate the source back to your show if you can't find enough sources directly pertaining to Blind Spot. That's the most helpful bit of advice, again, for the reasons I was just talking about. And then Alexandria said, hi, if I understood what you were saying correctly, I think that instead of trying to find sources that talk about both your profession and career choice and your movie, I would try to find something more specific about your profession that you could relate to the movie. I think it would be harder to keep trying to find sources that talk about both instead of making the connection yourself. And then she provides an example. Say you noticed that a programmer was portrayed differently in the movie than what was actually happening in real life. You could research what programmers do, and then go back to your primary source and point out if there's different areas in the movie where the portrayals are inaccurate. So both Samantha and Alexandria, and I'm sure that there were other people who commented on this, but these were the first two that kind of stuck out. Both of y'all have offered phenomenal advice that is really kind of what I'm saying here. Okay, so next question, and there were a couple of them. Are we allowed to incorporate sources discussing more than one movie or TV show in our bibliography? Following up with that, do the majority of our sources have to be focused on the specific TV show or movie that we picked, or can we use different sources that talk about other TV shows or movies with similar issues? So it's fine to use a source. Let's say you want to analyze Grey's Anatomy and you want to argue that it's not accurate, but you find a source that's analyzing Scrubs and it's arguing that it is accurate or it isn't accurate. If you can take that source and apply it to your argument, that's perfectly fine. You know, if the source is useful to you, then you can use it. I think, again, this goes back to that confusion that your source has to talk about the profession and the movie at the same time, and it doesn't. So if you get out of that mindset, then I think maybe this question becomes void or irrelevant. But if not, follow up with me, an email. Should the annotated bibliography be in ABC order according to the source? Yes, organize your citations in alphabetical order. And then if you want, you can start with your primary source, or if you have multiple primary sources, you can do both of them and begin with that, and then do all of your secondary sources in alphabetical order and just organize like primary, secondary. Some people prefer it that way. I understand. It doesn't have to be. You can perfectly organize them in ABC order, and your primary source might be last or fifth or something like that, and that's fine too, as long as you have some kind of logical organization that stems around ABC order. I usually, honestly, y'all, I forget to check for ABC order. I forget. We have Moodle assignments the week large assignments such as the annotated bibliography are due, so that's like this week, right? Yes, you will, but I will try to make them easy, or like for this week's multiple choice where you can do them a bunch of times until you get it all right. And in the future, especially when you have your big papers due, I will try to make them like easy, super easy. And thank you for asking that question, because I honestly hadn't even thought about it, but now that I think about it, I'm like, yeah, they need to be easy. When it comes to our bibliographies, I saw that there needs to be information such as name, course, section, etc. before the title. Is the bibliography going to be attached to our papers? No. And if so, would we still need to include all of that information? So when you write your paper, what would we say, like 5 weeks from now? Is that right? I think so. Something like 4 to 5 weeks from now. Then you're not going to have your annotated bibliography below it. You'll have a works cited page, but you will never have to turn in your annotated bibliography after it's due this Sunday. So second part of that question, you won't do it. When writing the annotated bibliography, can I use more than 5 sources? And am I committing? Oh, committed. Here's the question. So you can use more than 5. Am I committed to using these sources if I change my mind? No. So right now, like, that would not be fair, I don't think. You guys can change your mind at any point. You can change your mind and say, I don't want to use this source, or hey, maybe I do want to use this source, or even I want to write about a different movie or career or whatever. You can change your mind at any point throughout this project. So if that helps you take the pressure off, and remember, you guys are in the research stage while you want to be looking toward for the paper. Right now, you should be coming up with ideas, coming up with research, thinking about how you can start to formulate your argument. But if you're not exactly sure what argument you're going to make, don't let that be a reason you don't complete your annotated bibliography. Just find sources and summarize them and make up something about how you might use them in your paper. Just because you don't know if you don't know, some of you totally know. You're like, I've already started writing this paper, but I know that there are some of you that might feel like you have no clue what your paper is going to end up saying, but that's okay. The purpose of this isn't to tell me what your paper is going to say. It's just to do some research and say, here's what I see in this source. I could use it in my paper in the introduction. I could use it in the conclusion. I could use it to do this, blah, blah. So don't let this incapacitate you. How much flexibility can we have when it comes to our secondary sources? I think I answered this question earlier, but I left it as its own bullet point because I don't really understand what you want to know. So please, I should probably just email you individually, but you have to have the certain types of sources that I'm asking for. You have to have a certain number of secondary sources, and as long as you meet those requirements, then I think that you can have as much flexibility as you need. Now, if you are intending to write an argument about like the nursing profession, and all of your sources are about marine biology, and I don't see an overlap, that's probably too much flexibility. But otherwise, if it's applying, I think it's probably fine. In our annotated bibliography, if our works cited is too long, can we shorten it? So whenever I hear the word works cited, I assume that means like the works cited page after a paper. So just to clarify, you don't need that. But maybe what you mean is the citations themselves. If each citation is too long, can you shorten it? No, the citation needs to be as long as it needs to be. So if your citation ends up being 3 lines, then it's 3 lines, and that's okay. I don't know what else would be too long, so I should probably email you and find out what you're asking. I'm not sure what this is referring to. Don't shorten anything. Write exactly what it needs to say. And if maybe you might mean like the link, if you're finding something online and that seems like it's 3 or 4 lines, nope, just type it all out or copy and paste all of it. It should be exactly as it needs to be. The question I have, I answered this too, but I couldn't find it whenever I was writing this. So no, you can change your mind at any time. Okay, I think that covers everything. The last thing that I will say is I think I emailed about 10 of you as I was reading through your discussion posts. I thought, oh, maybe I could find a source that you're having trouble finding, and I sent you an email either through ProQuest or through just my school email. So be on the lookout. Check your emails for some helpful sources. I didn't email all of you. I did email some of you too, just to make sure you're on the right track, things to think about. So please check your emails and let me know if you have questions. I know we're kind of getting down to the point where all of your questions are coming forth because you're really digging into your research now, and that's okay. I'm available to answer your questions, certainly through Friday. Once the Saturday, Sunday part comes, I probably will be less available, but I will monitor my email. So if you ask me quick questions, you're likely to get a quick response. Okay, I think that covers everything, and we're under 30 minutes, so I'm going to try and keep it that way. Email me if you need me.